So hello and welcome. My name is Herminder Wright and I will be your host for this TLC session. Thank you for joining us for Learning Communities in the Online Environment, Designing Evidence-Based Pilot. Please welcome Dr. Stephanie Fink and Dr. Matthew Laubacher.
Well, good afternoon, and I believe it's afternoon for everybody now. Well, no, not our Pacific folks. See, this is what happens in Arizona because we switched time zones. Good morning, good morning / good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our presentation on learning communities. This is a little bit different, or our scope's going to be a little bit different than initially we wanted to focus on. We wanted to get into actually designing a pilot, and we are not at that stage yet due to a variety of factors. But we wanted to use this time to kind of go over some of the where the research is on learning communities, what they are, what they're perceived to be, and often that's different than what they actually are, and how to create them moving forward. And then one of the things I'd like to take from this is to brainstorm how we can use this or use similar strategies. And the other ones we're learning in the conference this year, to really utilize them in our courses, our programs, and across the institution, because learning communities are not simply something that needs to be focused in a course. It can be much broader, it can be much shorter, much more narrow. It really depends on the purview of the institution. So with that, I think it's probably best to sort of open it up and see if what people think of as a learning community.
So you can unmute yourself if you'd like to share some thoughts. You can type into the chat box if you'd like to do it that way. I know you thought you were just going to be able to dial in and listen, but we're putting you on the spot.
Right. And Stephanie, do you mind handling in chat? Because it's I'd have to exit out.
Yeah, I have the chat. I have the chat.
Great. Everybody's shy. It's like the first day of school.
They're all chewing because it's lunchtime.
Yes.
Okay, I'll give it a stab.
Yay, Michelle, thank you.
Hi, guys. Okay, I think of a learning community as a group of people interested in learning more, but collaborating around a particular topic or kind of goal. So common goal, and wanting to learn from each other, as well as conducting research on their own, or maybe collaborating to learn more in a more directed way.
Thank you, and thank you to John and Sherry for sharing some of the same thoughts, which are this idea of collaboration, community, mutual support, a common goal, and what you'll see, I think, in the jargon of the field, a social construction of knowledge, which is something that you'll see come up quite frequently. Thank you, Tamika, also that it's bi-directional. You could also say it's multi-directional. It's not merely flowing from an instructor towards students or between an instructor and a student, even if it's student-directed, that it's something more holistic and that brings in the different perspectives and experiences of the different members of that group. So I think you all have a pretty good sense of some of the broad parameters associated with learning communities. What we'd like to do kind of quickly, we'd like to just kind of run you through some of the literature review we did. Learning communities have been out there for quite a long time at this point. But so we sort of tried to focus our efforts here on some of the centers that are currently at the forefront of the learning community movement and integrating learning communities across their institutions. We were particularly interested in the Evergreen Institute, and they actually have a summer institute for institutions that would like to put into action a learning plan for establishing learning communities. That was our original intent for this session. nevertheless, I think something to really focus in on here is the second point, that we can think of learning communities as something that aligns with the new vision we've been hearing about for the institution, even if we're not entirely sure where we're going at this point. Some of the main issues that were brought up that we've been hearing over the past few days is that we are in fact restructuring curriculum, and that is something that learning communities are interested in doing. And so I wanted to focus your attention to this idea of restructuring the curriculum to address structural barriers to student access and their ability to attain excellence. So these are things I really hope you can start thinking about a little bit, this idea of restructuring curriculum and how it can intersect with and be part of an approach to using learning communities as we move forward.
I'd also like to sort of just reinforce the collaborative nature of a lot of the focus on collaboration in much of the research we've looked at. A lot of institutions like to say they have a learning community, or, you know, they have a couple faculty members who are really interested in it, really, you know, dig deep into it. But really what we found, as we'll see as we go through the rest of this, is that in order to develop successful learning communities, this requires a large collaboration across the institution. It's not in order to have truly successful, powerful learning communities, this needs large institutional support, structure, etc. And I really want to point out here that students are obviously an important aspect. Faculty are incredibly important, obviously, but also academic affairs, student affairs, etc.
So when you look at learning community theory as it's put into practice at various institutions where it is being utilized now, we come back to this idea of the social construction of knowledge, and that and this is interesting also when we think about what we've been hearing the last few days about the relationship between content and the members of the community. And here we see there's a shift. It's not that the learning community is without content, but that in terms of attaining the objectives of the content, it's really about the way the members of the community interact with each other that allows for this kind of connection and the depth of learning that the learning community hopes to support and achieve. Matt, did you want to add to that? Or
I think Matt always wants to add to everything because that's Matt. No, I think that going, you know, just focusing back on one of the things that's going to be maybe changing, right, is how it means, or one of the things that learning communities do focus on, right, let me put it that way, is the role of teacher or instructor as facilitator, right? Developing an area where students feel safe to share, can get out of, in some ways, get out of the academic aspect of things and really dig in, develop a community, and from there on can then use the community as a way to gain knowledge and reinforce knowledge. And many of our students, as we've seen in our entry point course, are social learners, right? And so it really makes sense to sort of think about how to address social learning in our courses in extension of the discussion board. I know that's where a lot of our social learning takes place, but thinking about how to then make the entire course, or make courses or a community or a program into something that is greater than the sum of its parts.
I wanted to address a question that John posed in the chat, because I think it's really important before we go off into la la land on the beauty of socially constructed knowledge. You can agree that it sounds wonderful. And John asked, in case you haven't been following the chat, how does a community construct knowledge if they have no knowledge of the content of a course? Ha! Nice question, John. I think some of you in education probably have answers to this. My answer to this, and I'll just speak for myself here, and if anybody would like to chime in here, I would say that this is where you come back to the focus, the common goal. And the common goal can be the expansion or development or attainment of a body of knowledge of a specific discipline, or what we might want to call a problem. I know in history, sometimes we say, what is the problem? And the problem is really, what is the question? What is the material we want to learn about? We start with questions rather than answers. And then through those questions, we seek evidence to support the position we'd like to take. And this is actually meshes with this idea of striving toward a common purpose and constructing the knowledge, as different members of the group bring different pieces of evidence through their research to address the question that the entire group is facing. I'm not sure in terms of your classroom settings as they've existed thus far, or perhaps when you've had another hat on. I worked on the development of an honors college class, Honors 480, and something that we did in that class that integrates learning community theories and practices was allowing students to define the issue that they wanted to collaborate on to seek to address over a 2-week period on a specific project they were working on. So here they are given some building blocks, you might say. They have to bring their own blocks too.
Mm-hmm.
And that is then when this collaboration, participation, and integration of different modalities of learning and different levels of knowledge and experience come into play within the community. And then next, we will add in to one of these attributes is that they re-examine their findings and continue to question them to enhance their metacognition of the material.
Yeah, I really want to focus on, I think the analogy of blocks is a very good one, right? Because we're not, one of the things that some successful learning communities do is they give students a task and say, go play, right? And to your point, John, it really, you have to have some sort of a baseline of understanding of content to go play. And so, you know, part of that is bringing common understanding, bring their current conceptions to principles of andragogy, et cetera. But a lot of it also is how you structure work. One of the things that Stephanie did in another course development for history is we had essentially little choose your own adventure type modules, right, in the discussion form. And Stephanie would probably be a better person to describe them than I, where students basically role play a discussion, right? They put them there, we ask them to pretend they are in
the Silk Road.
right. They're on the Silk Road. You are a trader. What do you do? What are your goals, et cetera? And that allows them to kind of get into things a little bit better. And to be sure, there's plenty of misconceptions, and then we have to address them. And Stephanie's, I believe, Stephanie, your approach to that is to address them as if you were also in that particular time period, correct?
Yes.
Right. So I think there's lots of opportunities to play with this. And I think content's always going to be important. Concepts are always going to be more important than content, but it's sort of a way in which you get students to that point, right? So just to, again, briefly kind of go through some of the attributes here of learning communities. We don't have the time to go through everything. So I would say that if you're interested, this is in a PowerPoint, you can reference it definitely. There's a Google site that we're going to link out at the end. Anybody can go get this. But really, I think that the important thing to focus on here in learning communities, as well as, I think, again, going back to both the intersection between pedagogy and andragogy, is student engagement, right? And if you have students, focusing on the 4 I's here, if students are able to be involved, feel invested, feel that they can influence, and have an identity within these communities, you're going to end up seeing that students are going to then be able to take that and move forward. We should also mention, that these the short-term gains may not be there, but this is something that is an investment for students over time, for the institution over time, that will bear fruit based upon the level of investment. Anything more to add on this slide, Stephanie?
I just think that the other thing just to focus on also is to stress the interdisciplinarity that is often characterized as learning communities, and the way that student services are integrated into learning communities, which speaks to some of the language I've heard surrounding the first year experience.
Right, and I hope that we end up going that particular route
Yeah.
too. So for those keeping score, that is now 7 eyes on this one slide. So there you go.
Okay, so there's just a nice little visual for you. If you're a visual learner, you could see our little Venn diagram here, all chalking up to that excellent educational experience we hope to inculcate through the learning community, and bringing together these different ideas of presence and the way that the learning community is crafted to enhance all of these different intersecting and hopefully overlapping and supporting goals.
Yeah, and the only thing for me to add on this particular thing here is goals. We think a lot about outcomes here. We're probably more than a lot of other institutions, which is to our benefit. But one of the things we also have to focus here on is student focused out, not us focusing on student outcomes. What outcomes do students, what goals do students have for themselves,
Yeah.
right? And that's really, really important because those may not match up with the student learning outcomes we've developed, but those are still very important for us to be aware of. So there are, as we've sort of been mentioning, there's a lot of different benefits of learning communities. Again, we're going to be sending this out, but I think that the big thing here from our perspective is identity and social presence. We work online, we work in a virtual environment. We all know that can be isolating, not just to ourselves, but to our students, and they may not, there's not a way, in many ways, for them to develop relationships with us as faculty or with other students. And so this shifting towards a learning center, learning community type of paradigm, I would say, would allow this to sort of grow over time, as well as, again, deepening engagement. And to me, that's a big takeaway, because if you get students to engage more with the course material, with each other, with the faculty, that's what's important in the class, right? And that is eventually what's going to drive learning and thinking about learning.
Okay, yeah. So then the next slide is just sort of a summary of, the other one had some specific references in it.
Right.
And this one I would call more just a broader overview of, if you start doing a lot of reading on learning communities and start looking at some of the websites of institutions that are developing them robustly, these are some of the takeaways you'll see more globally. And I think something that is important for us to also see is, not only does it support their academic development, achievement, and happiness, you might say. I know that may sound crass, but you do want them to feel their own satisfaction with attaining their goals and learning, but that these can be bridges also that move students between the academic environment and the broader environment, whether it's home, community, the workplace, all of those things. The learning communities can be places where we bring all of a more holistic student and student experience together to inform both their construction of knowledge and also their own assessment and reassessment of their learning and their learning processes.
Okay, and so just some basic recommendations from the field. Again, these are high level, so we get more in depth if you guys are interested afterwards through email, or we can send you some references or discuss more. Really, it comes down to fostering student motivation, because motivation is not extrinsic, right? You can't motivate someone to do something. You have to provide, as instructors, we have to develop a space for students to feel motivated to then complete the tasks we give them, or to develop more intellectually, develop skills they need to do. And so that's our goal as educators, is to help foster spaces where students can be motivated, really. And then focusing, another really important thing here is support. It comes down to support, not just support from us, not just support from student services. These are really, really important, right? But what we've found is, in order for learning communities to really thrive, there needs to be broad-based institutional support from the college level, from the institution level, where there's open collaboration between really everyone to try and provide this environment for students. And that way you can develop a learning community that's a class or a program or a college or across the institution, provide opportunities for students to really grow and learn from one another.
Right. And, we could also put that into, competencies, competency groups could be centered around a learning community. I think that our hope is that as you start to see some of these ideas and some of the recommendations that are out there, you'll have a couple little light bulbs that go on and say, oh, you know what, we are actually already doing some of these things, or we could be more robust in the way we do these things, or we could bring a new vision of curricular structure using this for certain student audiences or student groups. So, hopefully this is just floating some stuff out there for you, pointing you to some more resources, and giving you a little bit of inspiration to keep going on it. Okay, so this is the big ticket one, right? Everybody wants that. If you look at why administration wants learning communities, is they often tie it to retention, which is not necessarily the same thing as persistence, as many of us understand. And interestingly enough, there are studies that show that there is an association between well-structured long-term learning communities and improved retention. Usually the results do not manifest immediately. What researchers are finding is that the depth of engagement, the depth of learning, and the value and the satisfaction with that learning increases thanks to the learning community experience, which as a result over time impacts retention and persistence in particular. So it's not, I think oftentimes there's a desire to throw learning communities in there as a magic bullet that's going to solve a retention problem, but you really kind of have to give them time to formulate in meaningful and very deliberate ways with specific goals in mind, and then measure them according to the goals you've outlined over time. So we're at a point now that there are beginning to be some longitudinal studies on the efficacy of learning communities, which was harder to attain, say, 10 years ago when you didn't have any long-term data to support them. But it's a thumbs up if you're willing to be a little bit patient.
Right. And so again, what are some potential issues that can face learning communities? And really it just comes back down to, we could focus on this as understanding learning communities broadly construed as an investment. They will pay, learning communities, generally speaking, if they are developed in a powerful way, meaning that there is support from different parts of the institution, there's buy-in, there's time for faculty to develop these resources, time to work with students and student affairs to better get their point of view and incorporate it into learning communities, that you will see long-term gains, right? And that's what it really comes down to, is these are definitely they're an investment, and they require thinking interdisciplinary, thinking long-term, and thinking about, that I would say interdisciplinary and thinking long-term are the two big takeaways there. And then we have a few minutes left. So if there are reflections that you have, any of you have working in learning communities, the experience you have either on ground, on the online setting here or elsewhere, we'd love if you guys could share or discuss if there's any issues you guys found in running these, etc. So this is sort of an open forum. Okay, Michelle, go ahead.
All right. So I love the idea of breaking down the classroom walls and sending students out to a maybe a college-wide or a program-wide learning community to go in there and do stuff and get to know each other from a broader level. I have a few questions. We have a learning community in my program where students are building their own online course across 4 courses. So it's a project that covers 4 courses. And I'm using Facebook. and sending students out to Facebook, and it's kind of a cognitive apprenticeship model where students are going into learning from those who are more advanced, helping those who are less advanced. The experts are coming in, aka the faculty, and it's just this kind of knowledge building about the process of creating your own online course. The questions that I have are, what technology are you guys proposing? And then how are you driving students to the community when students are at all different levels in the program and in the courses and so forth? So those are kind of my two. I mean, is there a grade attached to going to the community, out to the community, or assignments? What are you proposing?
Well, the way I worked some learning community concepts into that History 480 class was that you get, I'd say, micro points or steps in the process. You're rewarded with that little check in the book for some of the baby steps at the beginning. But where you have the results come in is that you build your own work within the group and are measured on both an individual and a collective level, where the individual is not punished, so to speak, for, let's say, you know, we've all had the experience, you're in a group and you're the only one who does anything and half the group disappears. What do you do, right? So you can come up with policies or strategies that reward people for participating, but don't harm them if their group falls apart, which is something I think we've seen in our online teaching, that sometimes groups evaporate or implode for whatever reason. So I think that the taking care and structuring the assessment and having reiterative assessments where there's self-assessment, group assessment, and then a top level sort of an arbiter being the instructor. Students tend to be pretty honest with each other, especially as you get into the upper division classes, or I'm not sure, is this working at your undergraduate or graduate level?
Graduate level.
Yeah. So I was thinking, wow, designing a course as undergrads, well, go. That's a great assignment. We had some problem solving kind of assignments in 480 that required that you integrate knowledge that was shared by other members of the group. That's a way of ensuring that there's a buy-in, because you have to basically cite your team members or your course members. But I think this idea of how do you balance the sort of open inquiry that you want to have, the risk taking, without penalizing people for making a mistake or not doing it quite right. And I think that's where having micro levels of assessment can be something to structure into the bottom line, is they do need a grade at the end of the day.
Right, and there are, and those are for sort of more of a class-based type learning community or a set of class. But to answer you, sort of a follow-up to that is there are other functioning learning communities that are programmatically based or college-based, and in those you could, you know, potentially think of something like a faculty forum, but only a student resource for students in Canvas, in which you can integrate champs and other aspects of things where you'd have, say, in education, you'd have, for an educational psychology, you'd have all your educational psychology stuff in a section, so that way students can go look at Vygotsky and Piaget and all these other things, and there's a common resource they can go to, so they don't necessarily always have to design. You don't, we as faculty don't always have to design things.
I think another thing to do is consider using website building for students as a place of documenting and archiving their knowledge, and also using Portfolium, which is something we have available to us, and being able to have students share their Portfolium accounts with other students so that they can benefit from, learning together from each other, learning from the example of positive and negative examples of what's out there.
Right. We're right up against it. So
We're on the wall here.
we're on the wall. So we have the time for we've got time for maybe one more question and or share instance of sharing, if anybody is interested. They're still eating lunch. Awesome.
Well, we do have this, I mean, we're absolutely happy to share this PowerPoint. The last couple slides have a list of resources for you. We also have a Google site that we put together that you can go and explore, take a look at. And if at some point you would like to share anything or help us collaborate on this Google site, I'd welcome you to go ahead and contact me, and I can put you on as able to edit, and you can, you know, add stuff. Don't worry about messing anything up. It's not exactly very sophisticated the way it's set up. So if anyone would like to participate in building this Google site, expanding on it, by all means, get in touch and I'll sign you up to that.
Okay, so then with our sort of the thing to take away then, or to think about, right, over not just today, but, you know, moving forward, is thinking about how learning communities can have a place at Ashford moving forward. And a few people have mentioned sort of the first year experience aspect, and that I think that's going to be an interesting place to potentially develop this. But there's also, you know, interdisciplinary programs of study, or these different like 3-course cut-in specialties that maybe we can develop some aspects in, discipline specific groups. So really, I think the big takeaway from us to, if there is an us to you sort of situation, is to think about how some of these things may have a place in your programs, in your colleges, the institution at large, and let's see if we can go down that road, right? Because there's a lot of potential benefit for our students to embracing this sort of paradigm. And I think, you know, we can go with as far with it as we can kind of go with it. So if you have any, as Stephanie mentioned, if you have any suggestions, reach out to her or me. And the Google site is right there. So if there's
the other thing is, if you're really interested in, I mean, this originally we had wanted to put together a team to go participate in the Evergreen State Summer Institute to develop learning community plan. Of course, the institutional flux that's going on right now makes that a little bit difficult to do, but I would encourage you guys to go take a look at the Evergreen State their website and at the Institute, and see if you're interested in it, because there's really no need to try to create these things, you know, recreate the wheel. They're doing some really good stuff there. And if you can walk away with a game plan after a week Institute, it might be worth our while to investigate those opportunities moving forward. I think we're done.
Yeah. Whee!
Well, thank
Yes,
you,
yes.
Stephanie and Matt, for your presentation and for everyone joining this presentation as well. We hope you enjoy the rest of TLC.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank